Years ago, I was in a rehab for drug addiction. I did 5 months in rehab, then 6 months of sober living following that. This occurred the last few weeks of being in rehab before going to sober living. I met 100 zad of addicts. New people would come and go on a daily basis. A lot of these people were much worse off than others, and everyone was in for different things. A lot of these people that came in also had a plethora of mental illnesses: severe depression, PTSD, bipolar disorder, and many others. I'll never forget the day Mike 30 to 40 Mikes was admitted. A lot of the techs that worked at the rehab informed all of the patients about Mike and his condition. He had a case of severe schizophrenia and would constantly be talking to no one. He would get really agitated and upset at times at these voices and would often yell and have a panic attack. It was very sad, to be honest. It wasn't like this would happen sometimes. This was an ongoing 24/7 problem that Mike dealt with. The rehab was situated in an old motel-like complex, except it was much, much nicer, like a fancy hotel. Girls across the street in identical buildings. Everyone was assigned to a specific room with 2 to 3 other patients. When Mike showed up, he was placed in the unit I was in. I introduced myself to him and shook his hand. He seemed so timid and nervous, but I gave a rundown of how things work and a rough daily schedule for our program. I showed him his room and told him to not hesitate to ask me for anything. Before I walked away, I told him, "Mike, we are all in here for our own reasons. I just want you to know that there is no judgment whatsoever on my end, and that no matter what you may be dealing with, you can come to me and confide in me for anything." He partially grinned and nodded at me. That was the last time we spoke for the 2 weeks he was there. That evening, I was watching TV in the living room of our unit when I heard him start aggressively talking to himself. The strange thing is that it literally sounded like he was having a legit conversation. I heard him say, "Don't say that, shut the fuck up." And then 5 seconds later he said, "I'm not going to do that. Leave me the fuck alone." And then a few seconds later, "Get the fuck out of here." This was expected because I was informed of his condition, but hearing him have an episode the first time made me feel bad, really bad for him. Things took a very odd turn over the following days. A few days after Mike was placed in my unit, I woke up one morning to go make some coffee. I was in the kitchen and Mike's room was down the hallway. I was pulling out a coffee filter when I heard clear as day, "What are you doing?" I turned around, expecting to see Mike, but no one was there. Then I hear Mike all the way from his room scream, "Ah, get the fuck out of here." I was very, very confused and didn't know what to make of it and kind of just shrugged it off. I was pretty alarmed by this, but things kept happening. It was late a week I was in the living room watching TV again when I heard Mike having another conversation with himself. But this time I could distinctly hear a second voice. I thought to myself, does he have a split personality and is having a conversation between himself and his other self? The other voice was so much different, and I kept telling myself Mike's just really, really good at imitating other voices. I turned the volume down on the TV so I could hear more of this conversation. Mike says, "I told you no. I'm not going to do that. Leave me alone, please." The other voice responds, "Just go and do what I tell you. It's for the best." Mike responds, "No, that's bad. I won't do it." The other voice responds, "Go to the kitchen and get the knife now." Then Mike let out a big scream of despair. I sat there on that couch in utter disbelief. My brain could not comprehend what I was hearing or what was happening. I got a huge sense of dread that came over me. I got up and started making my way to his door to check on him. As I got closer, the conversation was becoming much more audible and clear to hear. There was 2 fucking people in that room, and nothing is ever going to change my mind. As I heard the other voice trying to persuade Mike again, I knocked on his door, and the voice stopped immediately. I opened the door to tell Mike I heard him scream and wanted to see if he's okay. It was just him sitting in a chair with his head in his hands, like he just got some really bad news. He looked up at me and said, "I'm fine, thanks. Please shut the door." I immediately went to our head nurse and explained to her that Mike was saying some pretty scary things and that I was in fear of my life being in the same room as him. I mentioned to her hearing him talk to himself about a knife, and that was all it took for them to take Mike and relocate to somewhere else where he could get help. To this day, I think about this experience I had with Mike and try to find reasonable explanations for what happened and what I heard. I've never heard voices or had hallucinations. My father is a fully diagnosed schizophrenic. Because of this, my mum filed for a divorce 7 years ago because she simply couldn't handle him anymore. He struggled with his medication, sexually assaulted her best friend, and was constantly out of work. On top of that, he was explosive and had a gambling problem. I really couldn't blame her for the divorce, but that didn't make my life growing up any easier. I think the first time I ever heard my dad do something out of the ordinary was when he started to whisper things to someone next to him when I was around 9. I don't remember exactly his words, but I remember asking him what he was doing. He always looked at a distance, as if the question didn't register for a few seconds, then look at me and start to move his lips. But words didn't come out. It was just whispers of sorts. Finally, after a few more seconds, he would respond with a, "Huh?" This was before we realized it was schizophrenia, and I was still a kid. I had no idea what the next 4 years would be. A complete shit show. Eventually, the whispers turned into random yelling that would scare the shit out of me as a 12-year-old. Being alone in the house with your dad suddenly was terrifying when you had no idea what was going on. Every time it would be the same. He would say something completely random, then stare into a distance and start to whisper. Whenever I approached him and asked him who he was talking to, he would stare into the distance, look at me, then start to whisper again before the question finally registered into a "none of your business." That was fucking scary. I was so scared. Eventually, the illness progressed and he started seeing more visual hallucinations. When I was 13, I came home one day after school to find that all of the doors had multiple locks and that someone had attempted to bolt the windows shut. I freaked out and dialed my mother, which shortly after came home from work to see what my father had done. He claims he is trying to protect us from being killed. I remember my mum looking at me, then looking at my 11-year-old brother who was sobbing uncontrollably. I believe sometime in that moment she made up her mind and knew that she wanted a divorce. A week later was the straw that broke the camel's back. My neighbour throws a block party for everyone in the area. I knew their daughter, and we were really good friends. They had invited everyone to attend last year and the year before, but this time around there was no invite. I remember looking out of the half-bolted windows, staring into my friends playing on their yard and thinking, why me? Why am I not there with them? That was when I heard a loud bang coming from upstairs. I slowly move upstairs, holding my breath, and I remember hearing a lot of cussing. I asked my dad what he was doing, and he says to stay back. This is for your own protection." He was trying to hot glue the attic shut. I dialed for my mum, and she dialed 911. The police came and arrested him, not before he assaulted me, because it was for my own protection. As they dragged him away with handcuffs, he was yelling, kicking, screaming in Chinese and half English in front of everybody in the block party. Our American neighbors, my friends, and their little siblings all stopped and stared in awe. It was because of that moment I sunk into a video game addiction for a few years, thinking I can escape reality by playing as something to take my mind off real life. The morning after, I went into his study and noticed a bunch of stuff that was hand-shredded by my dad before he tried to glue the attic. I was in the process of moving them into the recycle until I saw the invite my friend sent to me in the bottom of the shredded pile. They had invited me all along, yet it was my dad who ripped the invitation and tried to discard it away. You can imagine the hate that came out of this. After we took him to a therapist in a psyche ward the following year after my parents' divorce, when I was 14-ish, the doctor concluded that a man in the black suit was stalking him, and he was convinced the man was sent to murder his family because he was in some sort of government project that he imagined. The doctor said that putting the extra locks only spiked the episodes because the man had started to appear from within the house only after my dad tried to bolt everything shut from the outside. He shuddered what would have happened next if the police weren't involved. According to him, my dad thought that the man had lived in the attic, staking out to spy on us and then kill us. After he realizes that gluing the attic had no effect, he would have done something extreme, possibly murder us instead, as a way of protecting in his world from this man. My mother went undiagnosed until she was in her 30s. Everyone just said she was crazy sometimes, but no one was around her enough to really grasp the depth of it, other than me. She had a couple friends, but the rest of the family lived in another state and never visited much. Her relationships never lasted long until she met my belated stepdad. Unfortunately, he too was frequently away on business trips, though eventually she had an episode so bad while he was home that he was the one to get her to the doctors enough to demand a diagnosis. Despite all this, like I said, I was around her all the time and was always around for the symptoms. She had me when she was 24 while in the army and was discharged at age 29 after being admitted into a mental facility for doing something insane involving a higher-ranking guy. She never told me what that was exactly. I wondered sometimes if she could remember what it was. While she was in the army, I lived with my grandparents. Some of my earliest memories involve her sending me letters. I learned to read when I was 3, so I'd read them aloud to my grandma. Most of them would make sense, but a few times they were worded in a way that didn't make sense, and my grandmother would snatch the letter away and try to tell me what my mother meant to say. For my 4th birthday, she sent me a doll with a note telling me to hide it when no one could find it. I only remember that because I kept the note for years afterward. When she got back, she took custody and got a job. Most of the time when I was a kid, she'd be totally normal despite a drinking problem. But the things she said and did would make sequential, logical sense. But once in a while, she'd scream at me for making too much noise, or freak out at me for misplacing things on purpose. Even just moments after I would watch her move the misplaced items, usually silverware, shoes, toiletries. Mundane things. but she became increasingly paranoid about things not being in their proper places due to imagining me moving them about the house for no reason. I knew this wasn't normal, B. See, my grandparents and teachers didn't do these things. It's just that I was a little kid, and no one listened to me when I mentioned the problems. My grandparents, aunt, and uncle would just try to change the subject, to sweep it under the rug. That was mostly it for the paranoid schizophrenia when I was a kid. There were solitary occurrences where strange shit would happen, like when I once found her laying on the floor, kicking a wall, because she was trying to get away. But those may have been drug-related. She didn't do hard drugs until I was 10 plus, not that I knew of, but it's possible she did them on the sly. Then when I was around 11 to 12, I think, she went into liver failure from hepatitis C. The liver failure caused hepatic encephalopathy, basically, poison in the brain. She recovered from the liver failure, but the paranoid schizophrenic outbursts were much, much worse after that, like full meltdown insanity, far more often. For some reason, she always believed I was the aggressor, the one doing things that would frighten, annoy, anger her. At first, she kept up with simply more frequent screaming attacks and groundings. When I would say awful things, in reality, I was always extremely polite and quiet, for fear of setting her off or move things, etc. After about a year or so, this escalated to slaps, then to throwing things at me, then to full beatings with fists or heavy objects, then to burning me with cigarettes or scraping me with glass, then to trying to put pills in my drinks, usually Vicodin, but sometimes Paxil, or, until he caught on and started hiding it, my dad's heart medicine. I quickly learned not to trust any of the drinks in the house. Finally, when I was 15 to 16, she began simply strangling me and slamming my head into things. All of these abusive outbursts were rooted in her belief that I was trying to say mean things or make her go crazy or hurt her somehow because she'd imagine it all. One example, it was summer vacation and I was sleeping late. My dad had dropped off donuts that morning before heading out, but I hadn't been awake for it. He always got powdered lemon filled for my mother and strawberry iced or jelly filled for me. I was woken up with my mother's hands around my throat, shaking my head, squeezing as hard as she could while she screamed that I had eaten her donuts, the ones Dad bought for her, that I had somehow maliciously snuck into the kitchen to pilfer the donuts she liked that I didn't know were there while I was asleep, and this grievance was somehow bad enough to warrant death by vice grip. The kicker? She had a bit of powdered sugar on the side of her lip. I'm 30 and I still can't forget that image. She was diagnosed when I was about 13 or 14, but we hit hard times shortly after and couldn't afford insurance, so no medication, no counselling, no relief. Paranoid schizophrenia ruined my childhood, and I'm scared shitless that I somehow inherited it. Every unexpected sound makes me so frightened that I could become my mother. It's horrible.